Welcome to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human and you can engineer leaders. Here on Your Corporate Shrink, join Elizabeth Frisch, a corporate fixer with a heart of gold, a wicked sense of humor, and a passion to solve pervasive business problems permanently. We will dive into the real issues and opportunities facing companies and government agencies today. Let's get started helping you engineer leaders.
Welcome, everyone, to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. This is Elizabeth Frisch, your host. I am so excited to welcome to the call today Kristin Faulder with Heurisay. She has worked from startup tech companies to 50-year-old brands in the strategic communications area. And when you think of strategic communications, it may sound like a big thing, but think, branding, your PR, media, events, all those things that go into your organization to ensure that whether you're communicating internally or externally, you are a success. And I'm so pleased to have her here on the call because very few people that I've worked with have mastered the strategy thing better than Kristin. So with that, Kristin, welcome to the call. And what I love, our call topic today, in case you guys are wondering, is the economy. Is that why you can't hire? And we're going to call BS on that. We are telling you, no matter how strong the economy is, you should be able to attract and retain people. It's the buzzword now, attraction and retention. And so with that, Kristin, I want you just to dive into our little topic here of this story called, I can't hire the right people because the economy is too good.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be here with you, and I'm so thrilled to be talking about this topic because I just geek out and get very passionate about, helping leaders and organizations figure out how to be more strategic and then how to be more practical with that strategy. And so I've heard anecdotes of companies, and I've worked with companies recently where they say, we get people in the door and they're gone within 2 days, or I can't find the right people. And, you pull back the layers a little bit and you listen to the way that they're saying it and how their body language, and you're hearing some of everything behind it. And you go, this is your company. This isn't the economy. I like to say that it's not the economy, stupid, right? Where they say it's the economy. So I'm just going to give you a quick data geek thing here. In July, I think it was, employers posted 6.9 million job openings, which exceeded the amount of unemployed people. If there was already a shortage of skilled workers, a mismatch would happen that would exist between the jobs that are available and the type of jobs that people are seeking. But there was research recently published that suggests the degree of mismatch has actually narrowed since 2014. It's narrowing. What means that the people are out there seeking the jobs that are out there, and companies are complaining that they're not. And so I argue that it's a culture thing, and that that sounds broad, and that sounds like it's something that's really hard to get your mind around, and we'll spend this time talking about that a little bit. But that comes in so many different shapes and sizes, and I think it can be broken down into a simple and easy to digest topic area.
I think it's interesting when you say that there isn't a mismatch, because you and I both get to work with a lot of the big brands from small to large. And you're right. I have companies that have a wait list to hire. They have really great retention numbers. And then I have other ones who are saying it's the economy, it's the economy. So really, I'd love to hear you dive into what's the difference between the people with the wait list and the people who are having trouble filling and keeping in a challenging, positive economic environment. Because I know right now I've got listeners on the phone on both parts going, what's that secret sauce?
Yeah, well, I'm sure every single listener has worked for a company that was horrible to work for or had a horrible manager, right? A lot of times you hear the saying, people don't leave companies, they leave people. And so there are some organizations where that is happening more than others. And so you have some of these organizations, like you had mentioned before, with a wait list, for example, that are getting it right. They're getting the culture thing down. It doesn't mean that they don't have people leaving. There are always going to be people leaving. a spouse moves, you get a better job offer in an area that you want to be. You're not on the trajectory that you want to be, so you find another company. There are outliers out there. But for the most part, it comes down to company culture and, what they call the company climate, which is how an employee feels working for that company, working with the other employees and their team members that they work with. And the fact of the matter is that most organizations and leaders, more specifically at those organizations, probably don't recognize or couldn't put their finger on what that climate is or what their culture is. And so I find companies, most big companies especially, have a mission, have values. Most companies or employees couldn't repeat those values. They're not living those values in the way of the culture in their day-to-day existence from 9 to 5 or 9 to 8, whatever the hours of their offices are. And so that creates this grandiose discomfort within the workforce and within employees that they decide they need to look elsewhere. Also, we should point out to people is that we have more generations in the workforce than we ever did. I don't think that I need to say that, right?
5 generations now in our workforce.
Yes. And I feel like people might roll their eyes and go, yeah, we know. That's huge. And people shouldn't overlook that. People that are in the workforce right now that are 50 have different values and different expectations than people that are 25. And that doesn't mean that either one are wrong or that either expectation is bad. It means that you cannot talk to your employees or treat them or have values, etc., that speak to one of those generations. You need to cross 5. So if you have a very small example, so if you have a message to deliver to your employees and a big message, and you decide to send a mass email, for example, and say, I'm done. My hands are I wiped, my hands are clean. I've gotten out the message. You're not reaching everybody. You need multiple channels, multiple vehicles. You need to look at the timing. Like, these things are things that most organizations are not thinking about right now and are not addressing. And it's causing this either exodus where they're not retaining and or they're not getting they're not attracting the right talent because it's obvious when especially the younger generation are checking you out.
So you just said it's obvious when the younger generation are checking you out, which totally makes some of the people on the phone going, what are they checking me out? What is it when I'm trying to hire them they're looking at? Because we all know from the workforce crunch that I think in the next 3 years was the stat that 75% of the world workforce will be Gen Z, Gen Y, right? And there's a lot of people my age on this call going, okay, they're checking me out. What are they checking out? What's turning them off? What's causing me to have this issue versus the companies who have a lot of people applying for those positions and having no trouble filling them?
Yeah, and it's completely valid. These questions and this cynicism is completely valid. I come from a generation that has a lot of cynicism for the people that come in behind me, right? And there's a lot of judgments made about all the generations and how they work. But the reality is they look and expect different things. So for example, the younger generation already has experiences with brands before they maybe even interact with them. So, okay, yes, social media. So you're looking at different social media channels, right? They're going to check that out. Your website. What does your website say about you? That is your online virtual real estate. That is a given. It needs to be done, updated, and make sure that you're reaching younger generations.
And even more importantly, mobile-friendly version.
Yes.
Because 80% now are accessing that website when they're looking for a job on a mobile device, right?
Yeah.
And so it's crazy to me how many brands, even really big famous ones, their mobile interface is terrible.
I will leave a brand, and I am not in the generation that they say does that, but I will leave a brand if the website does not come up easily on my phone. Because I have 2 kids. I'm out. I'm dropping somebody off at soccer. I need to look at something really quick and it doesn't come up for me. So yes, mobile optimized, but also with different kinds of content on that website. So for example, young people today don't read as much as people in their 50s or 60s, for example. So if you are trying to attract and retain people who are of the younger generation, they're not going to go and read 1,000 word blog posts on your website. They want videos and podcasts. So you need to have content that speaks across the generation. So yes, a written blog post once a month, but then maybe a video blog post once a month. So you have to be able to give them different content that they can consume on the go when they're sitting down in the evening and they have more time to do it. So the website's one thing. Social media, is another. Obviously, for younger generation, that's a big, having a presence and communicating your culture and your personality via Instagram. So this is an interesting tertiary comment on that.
And so I'm glad you brought up Instagram, because I was laughing. None of my kids or my younger employees are on Facebook, right? They're on Instagram.
Yep. It's a big deal. And so I recently did a workshop with this woman from Hasbro, and she was in their creative department. And so her job is, on a day-to-day basis, to play with toys and come up with names of the toys that Hasbro is coming out with and how to brand them and how to sell them to the kids and kids at heart who are going to buy these toys, right? And so she took us through lots of different examples and exercises on how to do that and how to think creatively. And one of the cool things that she did is she had us walk through a kind of a personality exercise, if you will. Brands have personalities, whether brands recognize it or not. They have personalities. And she walked us through, and it was hysterical. We did Tinder. And so one of the things that I love and I recommend to companies all the time is to step back for a second and take stock of what your personality is. Every brand has one. I don't care if you're a 5-person company or a 5,000-person company. You have a personality. What is that? And so is it male, female, non-gender? How old? Is it tight and stuffy? Is it fun and creative? When you do that, you can start to build those social media channels like your Instagrams to express and demonstrate that personality, the pictures that you post, that you take, the things that you say. So those are big. And also, I heard someone speak one time, and I know that this isn't the be all end all, but companies need to check out and focus on what their Glassdoor says. What's your Glassdoor rating?
Yeah. And just because we've covered so much stuff so quickly, just for the listeners. So website, hey, how do we get to interact? That's the first thing. That's your main brand, right? Instagram and social media, that's another brand. And again, most of these guys are savvy, and you are 100% correct. When a company comes in, I actually had a company come in and say, we're having a horrible time attracting and retaining. And I said, So I pulled up Glassdoor right where I was sitting there with them. And I said, have you read your Glassdoor? And they said, and this is a major Fortune 500 company, who said, what Glassdoor? Mm-hmm. And then when I showed it to them, they were like, oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was terrible. And it was actually, and it turned out it was just one division that was terrible, but it was causing attraction and retention issues across the entire global corporation, because the only thing on Glassdoor was these horrible complaints about this one area of the company that a whole bunch of people had worked for that had a toxic leader. And once they got that fixed, right, all of a sudden the it was like, oh, okay, we can fix that. But third thing, yes, Glassdoor, anywhere they can post up whether you're a good or bad employer. Everybody who's savvy now in the job market does check Glassdoor.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the be all end all, but it's definitely one of them. And if your rating is horrible and everybody is saying what a terrible employer you are, guess what? That's probably not going to be their top priority. Here's the way, I'll step back and say it differently, because there are a lot of different pieces about it, especially people who are my age or older, especially, but across generations. We always say first appearances matter, right? Especially when you're going into a job interview. I've always been of the belief, I've always worn a business suit or something similar when I go into a job interview, because I know that before I even open my mouth, I'm being judged on whether or not I'm going to fit into the culture, or, that they see that working. And so think of it this way when we're talking about your website and social media and Glassdoor. It's the first representation that somebody has of your brand. It's like somebody walking up to your house and your gutters falling off and your bricks falling apart and you going, oh, okay, this is interesting. Do I want to buy this house or not? Right? Most likely you're going to say no, or walking up to somebody and them being in pajamas at a job interview. It's the same thing nowadays when you have your virtual presence. People, when they're looking at you, are looking at how you present yourself and what they feel when they see that presentation, and whether or not it seems as though you have a personality that's going to fit their personality. Because all of those channels we just talked about express that.
And it's interesting too, if you don't Google, Bing, or whatever search engine, Safari, your organization and see what your first page hits are and your first page images are, again, to your point of shingles and roofs, I remember when my best-selling book came out, I was getting massive traffic. And a Russian prostitute tagged my name to try to pick up some of that traffic. So the first 5 images showing up of me, and she happened to look like me just enough to make people like take a step. And I had no idea till a client called me. So if you haven't, and so now I literally weekly check my name on Google, because I had a client call me and go, Elizabeth, there might be a really old picture of you on the internet that you might not like. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I pull it up and I'm like, and this was just a smart person seeking traffic. And luckily it was totally fixable, right? The minute I call by, I was like, oh my God, you're going to get this person off my feed, you know? But if you haven't Googled your company, if you haven't Binged your company, if you haven't Safari'd your company and seen what your first page looks like, you never know what's showing up on your company. You know, if you had something really bad happen and some article got a whole ton of traffic, something totally dissing your company could be the first thing an employee sees.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's like when it comes to that marketing and branding of your hiring process, you got to know, because this generation, every generation now, you know, even I laugh, I'm like, yeah, even my generation, the first thing I do when a company approaches me and wants to be a client of our organization is I search and see what everybody's saying about them, so I know what I'm stepping into and get the data. Research is amazing.
Yes. I mean, that's one of the things that has me so jazzed about the area or the time in which we're living right now, is because I am an information geek. I love reading. I love finding out new things. I love learning, and it's all at my fingertips right now. And so, and so many people feel that way. And it's interesting. So, you know, I'm working with a client right now, a company who's been in business 50 years and has been mostly successful for those 50 years, with some dips during the downturn in the early 2000s. And we're going through a rebrand with them. And a lot of people that are older within the organization have a hard time understanding why that's important. But their clients and the people that are hiring them and working with them are getting younger and younger and younger. So the people that they used to work with 20, 30 years ago are going to start retiring. And they're wondering why they're having a hard time hiring right now, number one. And I keep telling them, you don't want to have this problem where your website is 1985 website and your entire online presence looks like it's, you know, from the 80s when the economy hits rock bottom. You want to do it when you're profitable, when you have the time, and when you know you need the right people in the door to focus on it. Because I'm telling you, as the generations that you're selling to get younger, the stuff that you're doing isn't going to cut it. And you're not going to want to put the money out and invest the time and resources when you recognize that you're really having a lot of those problems.
One of the things I think is really important, you know, we've talked about how people check you out, but we're circling back to that culture conversation. You know, I had one organization just come up to me yesterday and say, look, we're a stodgy consulting firm. So we can fake it on all the branding, but when people still come in, you know, there's still, you know, there's lipstick on the pig is the expression here in Texas. And it was really interesting. I'd love you to comment on, if you have a certain culture that works and allows you to perform, what's the shame in being modern and saying that's our culture and attracting the people who like that? Because you can judgmentally say a younger person wouldn't like that culture, but that's not necessarily true. Any thoughts about that my client brought up?
Do I have thoughts? Yes, I always have thoughts, right? My husband would be like, don't ask that question. Absolutely. And there's another word. So you said at the beginning, attracting and retaining, right? Two buzzwords. I'll give you another. I'm not sure if it's a buzzword, but I think that it is going to drive the next at least handful of years in the wider world, like especially business and all sorts of things, is authenticity. People, because of the access to information that we just talked about a few moments ago, people can find out where the lipstick on the pig is. They can find out where the bodies are buried. So don't do it. Don't lie. Don't hide yourself, and don't hide who you really are. Be authentic with it. I think it was, and I hope I'm getting this right, I think it was Nebraska recently that ran an amazing campaign that owned what they have and they don't have, and said, we're not for everybody from a tourism perspective. We have this, and this to offer people. If you don't like that, then maybe this isn't the place for you to visit. And they kind of made fun of themselves for what they have and what they don't have. So a company, you don't want to find, hire, and spend the money and the time bringing somebody into your company, because it takes a lot of money and time to onboard somebody and then train them, for them to say, wait a second, this isn't what I signed up for, and then leave.
And the latest stats are, on average, it's 20% of their annual salary to go through the whole process. And in major urban areas, think Austin, Boston, LA, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, Cleveland, it's going 30 to 50% of annual salary.
Yeah.
So I love what you said about that. Next step is be authentic. This generation is even more savvy than any previous ones on sniffing out the lipstick on the pig, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so here's an interesting thing too that came up. Someone asked me about toxic work environments, right? So what about that? Like, you have to attract and retain people, and then there's someone who says, well, this is kind of a toxic situation. So as an HR person, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are HR directors, would say, what do I do when I know I'm hiring them potentially? Like, I think my attraction retention problem is because we aren't the best place to work. What would you say to that HR person listening to this call going, yeah, well, I do think our attraction retention is a culture issue. What do I do next if that is true?
Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's like on the news when they say, well, obviously, if you're in danger or if in a lot of problems, get out first, right? And then deal with the problem. So I would say, first of all, if it's super toxic, then maybe that's a clue for you, right? As somebody working
as a human being on the planet, right?
Yeah, right. But if it's just toxic enough that it's causing some problems, personally, I would recommend that I think HR, and I say this without much exaggeration, this isn't hyperbolic, is one of the sexiest jobs out there for the next decade. I think that HR in the past has been stodgy and they've gotten this bad rap. And nowadays, because we're talking about retaining, attracting, and culture, that HR leaders have the ability to make some of the biggest differences inside of companies today and moving forward. And so I would say take the reins, take the lead, and try to figure out what you can do to mute the toxicity as much as you possibly can. So most leaders, especially C-suite, don't invest money or don't take people seriously unless they see something that says so. So I would say collect data. The first thing that I do when I go into any company, and this is no matter the project, if I'm doing media and PR or if I'm doing internal comms, setting up a sales enablement process, for example, or system for a company, I always step back and say, okay, what are we dealing with? I take stock, I conduct an audit. And so that's what I would say is the first step, right? So if you're inside the organization and you know it's toxic, you need to be able to identify where the toxicity is, what's happening. And so talk to employees if you can. conduct anonymous surveys. Start to see, I like to tell people to start drawing communications diagrams. Where are the messages funneling through the organization from top to bottom and across? Are they getting across to the people that they need to be getting across to? Are you having a lot of rumors within your company? If you do, that means that they're not getting enough information. So you can start to collect data, if you will, in air quotes, some of it hard, some of it soft data, that you can then make a case to executives to say, we need to change this. And these are the ways that I see that we need to change this. But until you present them with that, they're going to have a hard time believing or seeing it.
And it's interesting because people think, oh, audit, it's so much data, it's so much stuff. At my organization, we have a 12-question fail-proof business assessment that if they just have everyone answer those 12 questions for me, I can heat map and narrow down to the division or the group where the toxicity or the source of, whether it's an HR or whatever. And so it doesn't have to be huge to get the information, because the good news is people like to talk about bad stuff.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I worked in a toxic environment a couple of years ago. It was terrible. It was the most toxic I've ever seen. And if you just sit back for a day and take a look at what was happening, you have people shutting themselves in tiny offices, talking a lot privately, rumors, right? Mm-hmm. You have such a high turnover rate. There were people that would go on maternity leave and come back and not recognize anybody who was there before. So you're talking a 3-month rate of people leaving through, going out the door. And so you start to collect this data, and it can tell you so much about what is happening. And one of the things that I would say is I would tell HR execs, if you don't have an exit interview process, or if you don't have a process for collecting feedback, when people are going to be way more honest and open with you because they don't have to worry about their job, I would say start that immediately with the next person that leaves, collect that feedback.
And I think that's so essential, because when you do have, well, can we attract or can we retain or can we fill, the person leaving is most likely the best person to let you know the holes in that position, so that you can get the right hiring description, hire the right person, run the right stuff. So I love that we covered the whole, what do you look like in all the different ways now that you can be checked out. And, from a exit interview point, adding exit interviews to the process, so essential, because that'll keep you knowing what you need to know. And there's a third piece that we talked about. And as you all know on this call, we always leave you with a tidbit. As we wrap up the top of the podcast, what can you do today to have something cause a breakthrough that puts you on the right track to hiring and attracting and retaining the best people? And so, Kristin, if they were to do one thing today out of this call and this time that you've gifted us, what would help them really get their arms around quickly how to hire, retain, and attract people, no matter what the excuse or feeling is of why it's happening or not happening?
Yep, absolutely. And as I told you, there's so many good things, but the one I picked would be to look at your hiring process, look through the mirror. And I say that, step back, put your consumer hat on. So when you go to Amazon, when you're shopping on eBay, when you walk into Target or any of the brands that you go to on a regular basis, what do you expect from that? From a customer service, from a look and feel? Is it clean? Is it dirty? You have to put yourself in the shoes of a recruit looking for a new job. So I'm going to your LinkedIn page. I'm going to your website. I'm reading the description of the job posting. How does that feel? How does it sound? Is that going to be attractive to me? Then take yourself through applying, sending a resume in. Where does that go to? How quickly do you respond? All of those things go back to what we talked about at the beginning and say, what personality, who am I, and what am I reflecting here? And my guess, I'm 99.9% sure that every single person listening to this will find something that surprises them in that process, that says, oh my God, I didn't realize that was that bad, or that was that inefficient, or we were positioning ourselves like that, and you can fix it immediately.
That is incredible. And even looking at the interview process itself, who they see, who they talk to, was talking to one of the more successful organizations on even just how the day was structured or how the phone interview. There was so much care around that it was just one of the best onboarding interviewing processes I'd ever seen. And so literally take yourself through it all from start to finish, even if you turn someone down for a position, what you do there, because in this economy and how mobile employees are, you may turn someone down and 3 months later need their skills. So even when you're declining a person for a position, don't burn those bridges, don't blow them off, because, that's someone who's going to have a remembrance of their process interviewing with you and could say something bad or good about you in the future. So,
absolutely. Well, you have to treat them as though they're an employee already. For example, if they are the top of the top talent that you're trying to retain, when they walk through your door for that interview, how are they feeling? Is their name on the welcome board? Or, do they have snacks available or whatever it is for your culture? How are they going to feel if they get 3 offers? Are they going to choose you? And everything that you do through that process, you should be able to say, I've done this, they will choose me over another company. And you just have to audit that, but you don't know until you try, you look at it.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I already learned 3 new things I'm going to write up for my own hiring process for my own company based on what you just told me, because I had a boom, aha on one of those. And everyone, if you have any questions after this podcast, as you know, we do Unfiltered Fridays. So feel free to email your questions to podcast@thrivalcompany.com. And of course, if you have any feedback, suggestions for certain podcasts, we love to hear them. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Kristin.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human, and you can engineer leaders. With your host, Elizabeth Frisch. Find Elizabeth and her team at yourcorporateshrink.com.